So there's a second Rashi that I wanted to mention, and that was that why does Yaakov Avinu, Rashi says that Yaakov Avinu doesn't want to be buried in Egypt. And this is relevant because people have to think about where do we want to be buried? Where in our lives do we want to be buried? And a lot of people want to be buried in the land of Israel. And by the way, it's very expensive to be buried in the land of Israel, but it's very expensive to be buried everywhere. So that in the land of Israel, if you want to go into Jerusalem, currently a grave is going for around $45,000 if you want to be buried in Jerusalem. So that's that's in Jerusalem. But if you want to get buried outside of Jerusalem, you can get a grave for like $15,000. That doesn't include the transportation expenses. So Yaakov Avinu was the first one who was buried outside the land of, who had died outside the land of Israel, and he went to be buried inside the land of Israel. In fact, he didn't even do this for his wife Rachel. Rachel was buried on the journey, on the road, but Yaakov wanted to be carried all the way to Hebron, to Marat Machpelah. So why was it so important for Yaakov Avinu to be buried in the land of Israel? So Rashi, here we turn to Rashi, and Rashi gives us three explanations for why Yaakov wanted to be buried in the land of Israel. And I thought everybody should be aware of these three explanations from Rashi of why Yaakov wanted to be buried in the land of Israel. First explanation is that Yaakov Avinu said that the plagues were going to be the plagues were going to come from the earth, and the earth was going to be crawling with lice. So Yaakov knew that the plague of lice was going to be crawling there, and he didn't want the lice to be crawling on him. Now, I'm not really 100% sure what that means, because what does it mean? What do we care? What's crawling on you when you're gone? What do we care if maggots or worms or lice? But I think the way I understand what this Rashi is saying is that Yaakov Avinu knew that the earth, the ground of the land of Egypt, would be used as a source of punishment, as a plague upon the Egyptians. And Yaakov Avinu didn't want his body to in any way be contributing to be a plague, to be a punishment. So even though it was against the Egyptians, he didn't want his body to be used for violence in that way. So that's the first explanation that Rashi says. The second explanation Rashi says is because the Talmud tells us, and we had this recently in the Daf Yomi, the Talmud tells us that in Ksubos 111a, the Talmud tells us the following: Ein meitei chutz la'aretz chayim ela b'tzar gilgol mechilot. That the dead who are buried outside the land of Israel, when it comes time for the resurrection, the only way they're going to be resurrected is by rolling through tunnels underground. And that's supposed to be incredibly painful and harmful and hurtful. So Yaakov Avinu wanted to be straight in the land of Canaan, so he wouldn't have to roll underground in the tunnels. And so therefore, for this reason, he asked to be buried in the land of Canaan. Again, this too is very, very difficult to understand. What does it mean that you're going to be in pain by rolling under tunnels? Like, what does that even mean? It's very hard for me to relate to that idea, but to me, I guess the way I would understand it is that he didn't want to go under the additional. He didn't want his soul to go under the additional pain of being buried outside the land of Israel. There was an additional pain, and that's Yaakov Avinu wanted to be buried in the land of Israel for that reason. And the third explanation that Rashi gives is, and this one is the one that was the most logical to me. To me, it sounds the most plausible and logical, is he was worried that the Egyptians would start worshiping him. Shelo yasuni mitzrim avodah zarah. He was worried that the Egyptians would start worshiping him. And so that makes sense to me, because the Egyptians would recognize him as a great spiritual giant, and people worship the dead when they are in this culture of worshiping the dead, which was what Egypt was about, where they had these beautiful tombs and these pyramids and mummies. So therefore, for this reason, Yaakov Avinu was afraid of that. He was very afraid of that. He didn't want any part of it. And the Torah speaks very strongly, while we have to honor the dead and bury them properly, there's also this deep concern about worshiping the dead. This is the reason why Moshe Rabbeinu's burial spot is not known, because we have this concern about worshiping the dead. So those are the three reasons. Let me just summarize. One, he didn't want to be part of the plagues of lice. Number two, he didn't want to roll underground. And three, he didn't want to be worshipped by the Egyptians. Now, great rabbis have decided to be buried in the land of Israel, but other great rabbis were decided not to be buried in the land of Israel. They wanted to be there as a source of inspiration outside the land of Israel for their students, like the Lubavitcher Rebbe. His grave is the most prominent one outside the land of Israel. I mean, in America, where many of his Hasidim go and they do pilgrimages, and it's a place where many people turn to for inspiration. So that's the second Rashi I wanted to highlight. And I see that we have a question here. Let me just pause it.